The Yellow Wallpaper is really one of those stories that gets better. The more times that you read it, you find that there's just more and more layers that keep unraveling. So I want to talk about some of the potential layers here. First of all, this isn't really one of those stories that there's a clear-cut singular meaning to it. There are several different interpretations of what's going on in the story, so we'll talk about a few of those interpretations. First of all, I do think that it's quite useful if you know a little bit of the biographical information of Gilman, the author of the story. Through her writings, Gilman tells us that she faced a situation very similar to our unnamed narrator of the story that we read here. Gilman suffered kind of a breakdown, and she sought some psychiatric help of the time period, but the help that she received was very, very poor. Our society now looks back and sees that basically she was told to basically don't think too hard. She would hurt her brain even worse, that she'd hurt her brain already by thinking too hard. And you know, this was a time period where our society was still very patriarchal, male dominated, that women faced a very difficult power separation from the male authority. So basically the treatment that Gilman faced, she did not respond to very well at all. In fact, she says it just made her worse, that she was told not to do anything, not to really go anywhere, don't mentally tax herself. We can see the destruction involved with that. She actually found relief through writing, which we see in the Yellow Wallpaper. We have a narrator who picks up writing. It doesn't necessarily lead to the same release that Gilman found herself, but there are quite a few parallels of basically Gilman was writing a story to show just the ridiculous treatment of women who may have had a genuine health problem, a genuine health issue. I think that it's implied that our narrator of the Yellow Wallpaper may be suffering from postpartum depression. She does reveal that she's recently had a child. However, we don't have any details of the child. We don't know where the child is. We don't know really. It doesn't seem like the narrator thinks about the child, that she's had that often. So this is a time period where women who may have had an actual mental breakdown that could have been treated through therapeutic ways. Instead, it's just, the ladies tried to think too hard, bless her, let's just lock her in a room and don't give her anything to do that's too taxing. We don't want her to break her brain any further. Definitely not science, but it was science at the time. We see that the treatment that John gives the narrator is a treatment that's full of, first of all, it's full of drugs. I don't know if you caught just how much drugs this narrator is taking. She backs off of that, but while she's taking the drugs, definitely seems like she's getting a strict pill regimen. So treated with drugs, and also she's secluded. Don't get too much stimulation to upset her or anything like that. That kind of mentality is the treatment plan that John offers. The treatment plan, though, does not help at all. In fact, throughout the story, our narrator degrades into worse and worse condition. We see that this story takes place over time. It's kind of the diary entries. She slips a little further into madness with each entry that she writes. So John's treatment's not helping at all. In fact, it seems to be just making things worse. There's a lot of different interpretations of the story, as I already said, so I want to go over just some of the interpretations and see if you had a similar interpretation. You may have had a different one. There's a lot of symbolism in this story to play around with. Some people take this story for face value, that it's a supernatural story, that this is a story that actually involves phantoms, that it's a haunted room, and the ghosts that are trapped here that it's a story of possession, that the ghosts end up possessing this woman who's in the room. This is interesting because there is a point in the story where before, when the narrator talks about these phantoms that are in the wall, there's something outside of herself. And there's a point towards the end of the story where instead of the phantoms being outside of herself, she becomes this phantom, this trapped phantom. She is the same as this phantom. She kind of loses her identity as separate from these phantoms, and instead she sees herself as one. So some people argue that that's just a symbol that she's been possessed by the ghosts that haunt this room. I don't really know how much merit I find with that interpretation. I guess there's stuff there you can play around with. I enjoy a different interpretation that part two of this discussion will go into a little bit heavier, and we'll also talk about the end of the story and what possible significance that could have. So part two will go over in my opinion, the more interesting interpretation of the story.